Yeah, I think so. Let's talk about Romulans.
All right. So I'm going to switch the graphic here out. So we're going to start off by talking about, of course, the debut of the Romulans in Star Trek. That, of course, is linked to the original series. It'd be season 1, episode 14, Balance of Terror. This show originally aired on December 15th in 1966. The director was Vincent McEvity. Apologies if I'm saying that wrong. And it was written by Paul Schneider. This is very much one of those sort of like submarine kind of shows, I feel like, or submarine stories, where the ships are kind of because the bird of prey is always turning invisible, and because of how claustrophobic the Romulan ship feels, it just felt very much like a submarine show. I mean, I know they did that in Wrath of Khan, but I feel like this one kind of does that too, because they don't kind of know where each other are at times, it just felt kind of like that. You know, the ship's on the surface trying to hit the submarine that's under the water. This is
it's actually based on a movie, and that's the premise of the movie that it's based on.
Oh, well, there you go. I did not know that. You know some facts about this that I didn't. I've always loved this episode. It's one of my favorite episodes. I haven't done a lot of deep dive into the inspiration for this episode. I've always just taken it at face value. The really interesting thing, of course, with this is which I think we're going to see play out, is there is a story here about racism. One of the characters, which is Styles, is sitting in the navigator's position, which is usually the position that's occupied by Chekhov. Styles actually comes up later in Star Trek. I think he was originally intended to be the original captain of the Excelsior, or he was the captain of the Excelsior during the transwarp trials, because in Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, when the Enterprise is being stolen by Kirk and crew, Styles is the one commanding the Excelsior that goes after the Enterprise. He's the guy who tells Kirk, if you do this, you'll never sit in the captain's chair ever again. It's very interesting. I've always loved that kind of banter between the two of them and Star Trek 3 because of the connection to this particular episode, because they're antagonistic here too.
I had no idea there was a connection between Star Trek 3 and Balance of Terror.
Oh yeah, that's Styles. It's the same actor. It's him reprising the role, which is really kind of cool. And it's very interesting to see kind of the countenance and the way he carries himself in Star Trek 3. I think it's just a continuation of the attitude that we see, honestly, in this particular episode. His family, or a portion of his family, was killed. Actually, they were on a Federation-occupied planet on a settlement. The Romulans attacked it during the Federation-Romulan War.
I need to correct you. It was the Earth Romulan War. There was no Federation. It was the Earth Romulan War.
Well, there you go. See, I'm not as much of a Star Trek nerd as everyone says I am. But in that big pivotal war between the Romulans and Earth, they did not have the advanced communications capabilities that they have in the later shows. So they haven't seen each other. But again, it was an all-out war. Styles lost his family, and he still carries that with him. So he's very bitter about that. And it kind of comes out in sort of a racist tone, because when Spock is able to plug into their internal systems, because they're trying to find a way to detect the ship. And in the process of that, Spock is able to actually somehow plug into the cameras and the systems inside the ship and get a sense of what their bridge looks like. And then the Romulan commander turns and looks at the camera, and we all go, "Oh my God, it's Spock's father." No, he turns and looks at the camera.
We hadn't seen that yet. That hadn't happened yet.
We see legendary Star Trek actor Mark Leonard, who's actually playing the very first, to me anyway, the first Romulan, the Romulan commander. He's the first one we see. He looks just like a Vulcan. Styles freaks out, and he starts saying stuff like, Spock can translate their language. He's one of them, and he goes on this kind of racist thing. There's also an interesting kind of undercurrent to this story too, about a tragedy, like the tragedy that happens, in war and in military conflict and battles. There is a young couple that at the beginning of the show, they're about to get married. They actually both work in the phaser control room. And it's interesting to see that too, that the phasers have such a huge functioning mechanism. And to me, it reminds me back. I think they do it a little bit better in Wrath of Khan, where they're loading the torpedoes.
Yeah,
what I mean?
They're in the torpedo bays, yeah.
Yeah, they're rolling the cannons out on the deck kind of idea,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we see them in the original Trek doing their version of that, where they're in the torpedo control room, which is the phaser control room, and they're kind of getting all their weapons together. And the two of them actually work together. Work relationships are never a good idea, kids. But anyhow, they work together.
I just want to point out, there's something else we see, which I don't think we've seen in any of the episode, which is we actually see the Enterprise's chapel. The Enterprise has a chapel, and we actually see it in this episode.
And it's interesting, too, because Kirk says, in accordance with our many beliefs, too, which I thought was interesting. It's a very inclusive message, which is fun. So as the show rolls on, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen Balance of Terror, they get into a battle. The Romulans are destroying outposts, like on the edge of, I think it's a neutral zone, isn't it?
It's basically, there are outposts on both sides of the neutral zone. So on the Federation side, it's the old Earth bases that were established after the Earth-Romulan War, and presumably the Romulans have the same thing on their side.
Right. So they're going through and they're taking out, and they're sort of like poking the bear to see what the Federation has. Like if this cloaking technology can be detected, what their defenses are like, trying to see, where they are militarily, which is interesting because the Romulans are always seem to be portrayed as sort of that, empire building, warlike people. They're always building and expanding the empire, and they're doing it through force. Now, Mark Leonard's character, the Romulan commander, he's seen a lot of it, and he's kind of on the tail end. He's sort of like thinking, I don't know if I want to keep doing this anymore. And he seems like he might be ready to leave service, essentially. In a lot of ways, his character's in a similar place that we find Pike in the original pilot episode of Star Trek. He feels like he's on the tail end of his career, and maybe he's ready to see his way out of service. Anyhow, a lot of battles.
It's actually a good analogy because, that there is a similarity there between how Pike is depicted in the original pilot and how the Romulan commander in Balance of Terror is depicted.
So they have a lot of different clashes. I like the remastered version because you get to see the ships really well. It's a lot of fun. They have a lot of different battles, different things kind of evolve. And then towards the end of the episode, of course, the Romulan ship is destroyed. They actually just detonate the ship. They destroy it intentionally, so they self-destruct. And then the Federation crew is a little shocked because the Romulans are still that empire-building, warlike race that they were when they had their war many, many years ago. We have a better understanding of who they are, at least Kirk does anyway. Kirk thinks he does. And that's our initial introduction to the Romulans. And then, unfortunately, the young gentleman who was going to marry the young lady doesn't make it. He dies. And the episode ends with Kirk trying to console her. But Balance of Terror has always been one of my favorite episodes. It has a lot of action to it, but it has a lot of story and a lot of tension. And to me, it just always felt like that submarine warfare kind of story that they would eventually do in a much more updated fashion when they did Wrath of Khan. So that's my personal feelings and recollections on Balance of Terror and the introduction of the Romulans. But it gives us the classic things that we know. They're empire building. They're not afraid to fight. They show their resolve when they destroy the ship. They don't want to be taken prisoner. But they're very, very warlike. They're very mindful of building an empire. And even though Mark Leonard's character is on that precipice of maybe not wanting to do this anymore, he still destroys the ship.
Right.
He still can't betray who he is. And And I
No,
think
he still follows his duty, even though like his personal opinions. Uh, I actually like this theme. I like exploring this theme, which I call duty versus honor, because honor is personal, duty is to the collective. So I feel like in his own personal honor code, he feels like the Empire is too aggressive. These wars are basically meaningless. They're just getting their own people killed. He laments it, but as a soldier, he does his duty, and at the end, he destroys the ship because he's not going to allow it to get into Federation hands.
right. It's a great episode, and it tells us a lot about the Romulan people, besides just introducing us to them and the fact that they have birds of prey painted on the ship, which eventually get our naming nomenclature, warbird and such for the different ships. But it's a great episode. If you've never seen it, it's definitely worth watching. And again, original series episodes are available on a lot of services still. Obviously, you can watch it on CBS All Access. You can obviously watch it on Netflix. There's a lot of great different places where you can actually watch this. But if you have the chance, if you've never seen it, or if you have seen it, and here we are running up to Picard, I think this episode is definitely worth revisiting to get a sense of who the Romulans originally were when they were introduced. And then we're going to segue into who they are when we see them much, much later in the Next Generation.
I just want to add the film that this is very heavily inspired is called The Enemy Below. And I've always wanted to see it, and I never have. So I do want to throw that out there as well, that if anybody's interested in seeing that film, my understanding is it's a very good film, and it is what this show is based on. And this particular episode always shows up in top 10 Trek lists, always. It's not always number one, but it's always in there, in the top 10 of Trek of all time.
And I think deservedly so. This is one, definitely this is one worth revisiting, just period, if you haven't seen it in a while. But we both agree this is definitely worth watching and revisiting before Picard. So do you want to talk about the next one?
Yes, let's talk about the Next Generation's introduction to the Romulans. Let's talk about the Next Generation episode, Neutral Zone. Neutral Zone has a lot of parallels to Balance of Terror that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but I'm going to sort of just run down the episode. This episode, I think, is actually very important for Star Trek Picard for a lot of different reasons, but it's also very important for Romulan lore in general. The funny thing is that the Next Generation kind of changed formats a little bit, in that they always had sort of an A story and a B story, right? Unlike the original series that usually was just one story. Star Trek: The Next Generation took this sort of A and this B story scenario, and you can really, this is actually the B story. The A story in this episode is actually about a group of humans from like our time who were cryogenically frozen after they died and then were revived. I don't know if you remember all that, but that's really what the main story of this episode was. And to me, it was a good story. In fact, this is the last episode of the first season. A lot of people don't like the first season of The Next Generation. I actually do like a lot of the first season of TNG. I acknowledge some of the problems with it, and there are some episodes that I think are absolute clunkers, but this isn't one of them. I think that the series actually ended very strong. And one thing I found in my research of this episode was that one of the things that affected it was there was a strike going on. There was like a writer's strike going on when this episode was starting to be put together. So they kind of had to mash it together very quickly. And that'll get into some of the more of the lore aspects we're going to talk about later as we go through the episode. So as I said, the A story is really just about, it's totally unrelated to the Romulans. What has happened is that Picard has been off essentially at a meeting, mysterious meeting. And when we first come onto the Enterprise, Riker's in command, and they come across this derelict. And it looks like a space station, more or less from our time. I can see some elements of what looks like an Apollo module almost on it. It's kind of a neat looking little satellite thing. And they come across it and they realize it's from Earth. And it's just sort of a curiosity for them because I guess running into space junk isn't that uncommon for them because they're not like, oh wow, a vessel from like the 20th or 21st century. Let's check it out.
Right.
To them, it's just kind of space garbage. But the very curious Commander Data is like, well, I want to check it out because that is part of history, and he shows interest in it. So Riker allows Data to go on board with Worf. They do find these cryogenically frozen people. There's more pods, but only 3 of them are still active and occupied. Apparently, some of them, the seal's broken. These people are clearly dead. So Data thinks, okay, this ship is falling apart. The right thing to do is to take these people back with me. So that's what he does. And then in the meantime, Picard gets back on the ship. He doesn't even really know what's going on. He's back on the ship. And immediately what he tells everybody was, I just had a meeting. We're going to the neutral zone. And of course, everybody's freaked out by that because we find out in this episode that the Federation and the Romulan Empire really haven't had any contact with each other for like 50 years, which is crazy. So it's very much echoes the situation in the original Star Trek episode Balance of Terror. So there's been this long gap where the Federation has had no contact with the Romulan Empire whatsoever. So the Romulans, once again, are very mysterious, very much, everybody's apprehensive about dealing with them. We also find out in this episode that apparently Worf's colony, Khitomer, was destroyed by the Romulans while the Klingon Empire and the Romulan Empire were actually allied with each other. And that's the first time we actually hear officially about that Klingon-Romulan alliance. Because sometimes I know a lot of fans are like, well, where does that come from? That's never in any of the shows, blah, blah, blah. No, it actually is in the show. Worf says Romulus and the Klingon Empire were allies at the time that his parents were killed at the Khitomer massacre. They had an alliance. So that's one of the reasons that Worf hates Romulans so much. And that theme we keep seeing again and again in later TNG episodes. That this is why Worf has some major issues with Romulans. So the episode progresses. It mostly focuses on these 3 people that they find in the module, that the people that were frozen. One of them, it turns out, was a homemaker. There's a line where they don't know what a homemaker is. They assume maybe that she's like apparently there's no housewives anymore. Nobody takes care of houses anymore because they assume that she was involved in like home construction or something like that.
Right.
And then they have another character that was apparently like a banker, broker, some big Wall Street guy, rich guy. And then they have another guy that was an entertainer, and he was like a country Western entertainer. And I think actually he's the most entertaining of the 3. He's actually kind of funny, and he actually is able to adjust to the situation better than the other 2 are, because it turns out that the female, she didn't even know about this, that this was going to happen to her. Her husband apparently did it after she died. She thinks because in his mind that kind of kept her alive because he couldn't deal with her death. She never agreed to this. The banker guy, he basically is real arrogant, and he's like, hey, this worked. I defied death, and I'm going to get all my wealth and my power back because, I was only with the best. And of course, this is also the episode where we kind of learn a little bit more about the economics of the TNG era Star Trek. And we get some lines that later on, I think Deep Space Nine really went after, because this is basically where Picard kind of explains to that character that we don't really have money anymore. We really don't have that anymore. We've gotten rid of poverty. We've gotten rid of all this stuff, and of course, I think in Deep Space Nine, they played around with that and said, how exactly does that work? But this is the first show where they really say that, where Picard is confronting this character who was very rich in his era. We assume like in the around our time. And he's basically telling him that's not how things work anymore. And all that stuff is gone. And then we have the other character who's a sort of like honky-tonk Southern entertainer. And he actually seems to be the coolest with everything. And he actually has kind of like a nice little friendship with Data that I like. Him and Data start talking and doing stuff. And Data and him decide to throw a party. There's a line that I like when he's doing that. I remember commenting on it with my dad when I first watched this episode, where the 3 people, obviously, they're from a different time. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what Romulans are. They don't. They kind of have been thrown in this situation and don't really understand any of it. But there's this part where the one character is trying to do this party with Data to basically get everybody at ease, help them adjust to the new time period. And he says to Data, because Data has to leave, and talks about something about the Romulans. And he says to Data, so these Romulans, we're not going to be inviting them to our party, are we? And Data says, no, that would be inappropriate. And I always liked that because I felt like that was a good way for that character to realize sort of the gravity of the situation and kind of get some insight without getting something directly. Was that he said, we're not going to invite these guys to our party, are we? He's like, no, we're not. So as the episode progresses, they do go into the neutral zone. And at first, the Romulans appear to be kind of probing them, much like they did in Balance of Terror. They actually kind of decloak for a second, almost to provoke the Enterprise, because Worf is like, and even Riker is like, dude, red alert, get the shields up, fire. You know what I mean? Because we're only going to have a second before they're able to fire. Riker explains, we only have that brief minute while they're rematerializing to hit them before they can hit us. And of course, Picard shows his character, being the diplomat that he is, he restrains Worf and Riker and says, no, just let it go. And of course, then the ship just disappears at first. So now it's like, okay, Picard, you screwed up, because now they know you guys don't have the resolve. They're going to blow you out of the water. So it's very tense. In the middle of all this, the financial guy, the banker guy, he actually makes his way up to the bridge because he feels like, he wants answers, and that's kind of the person he is. He wants to know what's going on. He makes his way to the bridge. And then the Romulans appear again, just as they're trying to get him off of the bridge and saying, what the hell is he doing here? The Romulans appear. And another kind of interesting parallel with Balance of Terror is we have a very sort of esteemed Star Trek alum make his first appearance in this episode. And that is the actor who plays Gul Dukat. So he is actually one of the Romulan commanders. This is his first appearance in anything Star Trek. And so we have the two commanders, as we can see in the picture that we have up. The one on the left, if you're facing the screen, that is the actor who played Gul Dukat, Mark. I always mess up his last name. Alamio.
Alarma? Is it Mark Alamo? I can't believe I did it. I could hear it in my head until you were like saying you weren't sure how to say it. Mark Alamo? Mark Alamo? Oh my goodness.
This is the actor who played Gul Dukat in Deep Space Nine, and also was the first Cardassian that we ever see in a later episode of TNG, although that wasn't Dukat. That was a different character. So he's one of the Romulan commanders. And what we have is that basically the Romulans explain that, earlier in the episode, I should have mentioned, they find that one of the outposts is gone. Not destroyed, it's gone. It's not there anymore. It's just been, the way Worf describes it, it's as if it was just pulled out of the planet, And so when they meet with the Romulans say, listen, the same thing's been happening to us. And it's kind of funny because there's a sort of this tense moment. It's actually broken by the financial guy, the banker guy, because he says, hey, these guys don't know what's going on. They're hoping you do, Right. And and Picard says, yeah, he's right. They don't have any better clue of what's going on than we do. So what happens is that basically they decide that they're going to do some sort of a joint investigation to figure out what's going on. And we don't find out until later that what this all is this is a lead up to the introduction of the Borg. Originally, the Borg were supposed to appear in this episode, but because of the writer's strike, that's why they're not in it. So the Borg were actually supposed to be introduced, live, full-bodied in this episode. In fact, it was originally intended to be a two-parter. So we would have had the reintroduction of the Romulans and the introduction of the Borg in the same story. But apparently that didn't happen because of the writer's strike. And then most TNG fans know about the appearance of the Borg and Q-Who, little tongue twister for me. Later on in the second season of Star Trek is when we actually see the Borg in the flesh. And they make a passing reference to the fact when they do encounter the Borg, they find planets that have the same effect that this Federation outpost had, in terms of it was just basically carved out of the planet and removed.
Right.
So there was a lot going on in the neutral zone, and again, it's kind of interesting because this the Romulan part of it is very much sort of the B story, and the A story doesn't really have anything to do with the Romulans, but we do learn a lot about the Romulans in terms of the fact that they've been gone for a long time. They make a reference to that they were dealing with other things, like other more important things. I remember a big speculation of fans at the time was that maybe they were actually expanding their other borders on the other side, beyond Federation, Klingon Empire. So basically, the other direction, that they were involved with wars, taking over other planets on that side, or we're possibly dealing with another foe, on that part of space. But we do realize that from this episode that the Borg apparently have been in the neutral zone area, and they have been removing colonies or outposts on both sides. And so, like I said, we get an introduction not only to the Romulans of the TNG era, and that this is the first time we get to see their new ship. I remember that was a big moment as a fan when you saw the new design of the Romulan bird of prey. And the musical cues were really good in this episode as well for the Romulans. They did a good job with that, and we continue those musical cues much later throughout Star Trek. So very interesting episode. It does have a lot of callbacks in a lot of ways to Balance of Terror, in terms of the ways that the Federation has not had contact with the Romulans for a long time. Once again, they're mysterious. The Federation doesn't know a whole lot about them or what they've been doing in the last 50 years. And then we have the introduction of the Borg. So I think this stuff is going to be very relevant for Star Trek Picard.
And you mentioned it as a curiosity. I do find it really interesting. I think it's Mark Alamo, that he is in this episode. It's his first Star Trek episode, and he's playing a Romulan commander. And if we look at Balance of Terror, back in '66, we have Mark Leonard playing a Romulan commander. Later on, Mark Leonard obviously would play Spock's father, Sarek, and Sarek would carry forward specifically with Mark Leonard, not just through the shows, but into Next Gen, into the movies, and then a version of his character still continues on through Discovery. So, Mark Leonard's footprint on that character is huge. And then you look at Mark Alamo and with Gul Dukat and the huge footprint that character leaves too. It's very interesting. They come on, they're just playing the alien of the week, and then it turns into like a kind of, in my mind anyway, a defining role, as far as being a genre, actor. I also wanted to call out too the other sub-commander who is actually on the other side of him. He actually is a bit of a character actor. He doesn't have quite the Star Trek pedigree that Mark Leonard or obviously Mark Alamo will eventually have after this episode. But that's actually Anthony James. He played Varric, which is a role I don't think I'll ever forget, actually, from Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. It was a two-parter called, I think it was A Plot to Kill a City, Part 1 and Part 2. And his character played a very important and pivotal role. Started out as a villain and sort of changed allegiances through the course of the two episodes. And he also played one of my favorite leg breakers. He's actually one of the people that killed Officer Lyman Good in Blue Thunder, one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, I remember that Buck Rogers episode. That's a pretty good episode. And his character is very tragic, as I recall.
Yeah, very tragic.
His planet had been destroyed in some huge nuclear type devastation or something like that. So all the people of his race were like I think disfigured and all that. So I remember that episode very well, and I think he was in a lot of things. I mean, he's been in a lot.
Great character actor.
So
they always managed to get really great actors to play Romulans. It's like clockwork. It's interesting. They always manage to cast just the right kind of person to keep that mystery and that mystique moving forward. You can tell out of the two here, even by the way they're sitting, you can tell that one is the strategist, or the sort of more the KGB operative kind of guy, that he might be Tal Shiar, even spying on the other sub commander or something. And then the other guy, he's very clearly the leg breaker. He's the guy that is ready to just go to war right now. He doesn't even care. He's ready to put the Federation in their place. You could just tell. That's the thing that's great about character actors. I mean, everything about what they do informs their performance. Even just the simple way that they're look at Jonathan Frakes, arms crossed, defensive, on guard, not trusting of what's happening.
And Picard, they shouldn't be.
And then Picard, open to whatever's going to happen. He's not afraid. He's open. We'll deal with it. Relax. We got this. Although I'm not sure he's got that in that Countdown comic, but that's another story for obviously after the show debuts. We'll see how that ends. So,
very true. So, what do you think are some of the biggest takeaways from these 2 episodes as far as what we're going to see in Star Trek Picard?
Well, for me, Out of Balance and Terror, it's the portrayal of the Romulans. One, the fact that they are very much in the business of empire building. And even when they don't, a seasoned officer doesn't agree with what's happening, he's not willing to jump ship. He's going to hold steadfast on what his convictions and what he's pledged to do. He's honor and duty bound to do what he said he's going to do. So that says something very strong about the Romulan people. And then you turn around and you get to this episode, we see they're very much in the same place, but they're a little bit more calculating maybe than we might have thought. They're a little bit maybe more strategic than we would have thought. Mark Leonard's character in Balance of Terror, he's calculating, but not in the same way. These guys are playing chess. They're playing chess. That's a whole different kind of warfare. They're very much strategists. But beyond that, too, the big takeaway here is that it could even be when they say that they were dealing with other matters, their interaction with the Borg could go back even further than we're aware of. And that might be something interesting to see in Picard, is that the Borg were active, during Next Gen in Romulan space. And
obviously with the neutral zone, we know that. With the neutral zone, we know they were active in Romulan space. So,
but I'm just saying, I'm curious to see what it is that the Romulans know and have learned about the Borg that maybe only possibly Picard knows because he was a Borg. Maybe it's something that he doesn't want other people to know, something that he's kept secret that the Romulans do know, because the Romulans are very much about their secrets. So
absolutely, yeah.
That's my big takeaway from this particular episode is the connection to the Borg that goes so far back that it's a little bit shocking and when you think about it. So Picard, the show Picard, especially when you look at the Romulans, obviously with Picard, they have a lot of material they can pull from. But it's interesting to see how much they have that they could do in terms of the Romulan connection to the Borg and what the Romulans are intending to do with the Borg. I think there's a lot there. There's a lot there. So that's my takeaway from Neutral Zone.
As far as Balance of Terror goes, we've discussed this in a previous episode, but what do you think about reintroducing that classic design, which we really haven't seen? I know we see it, I think, in one of the remastered TOS episodes, but in the original airing of the original series, we never saw that design again because that model was destroyed. I don't know if you've heard that story, but that model was destroyed, and that's why later on when we see the Romulans, they are using the Klingon design. So we actually, that model was destroyed. So this is actually with Picard and with the trailer that we've previously commented on. This is the first time we're actually going to see that original Bird of Prey back, other than some of the remastered stuff where they did show it again. But yeah, what do you think of that?
I think it's interesting. It's an interesting callback. It's going to be curious to see if it's sort of a question of any ship, that's space worthy they need, because of what happened, because of the events that if you're not familiar, go watch the Kelvin timeline, the first J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie. That'll inform you right there. So I'm curious to see. Or
you could even read the original Countdown miniseries comic book too.
That's true. Maybe do that instead. But it's interesting to see if it's a question of if it was space worthy or if just it's a version of ship that they've constantly updated and they just keep in service because it's so reliable. So it'd be interesting to see. Or possibly, what I had been secretly hoping, which I know is probably not true, because I always have my theories. I had been really hoping that Picard and his crew were actually on board that ship because it has a cloaking device, and almost kind of like the Mandalorian ship. It's an older model ship, and because of that, it's easier to evade radar. Maybe it has some illegal tech that it shouldn't have anymore that they had left over from, the original, Earth Romulan War. I like that idea, but I'm pretty sure that's not the ship they're on. They're probably actually fighting it, which I think is unfortunate.
There is a scene where the ship they're on is fighting it. So
yeah,
I don't think that's going to be the case.
So
you never know. I mean, it could be a twist. But
I'd rather see them on the Romulan ship and then they rechristen it the Picard. But anyhow, that's just me waxing poetic on what I want to see. But no, I think it's fun to see the original, design back. But my speculation, like I said, is I'd love to see Picard and his crew eventually on it, and they call it the Picard, and that's their ship. That's not going to happen. Beyond that, I have a feeling it might just be it's a space-worthy ship. That's why it's still in service. And it might even be one of those things where, just like we're seeing in the Countdown comic, there's two factions, or even three factions. There could be disparate elements within the Romulan Empire. Reunification 1 and 2, you know what I mean? Spock was working with them. There could be colonies of Romulans that don't believe in what, is being done. And they could be fighting against. So they could start out conflicting and then eventually become an ally. So kind of like what we're seeing in the Countdown comic with those two Tal Shiar agents who've decided to switch sides. And you never know. It may be a super advanced ship and just look like an old ship, and it's deceptive. I can't, I can't imagine the Romulans would do that, have an outdated ship design, and it comes up and it's like, wow, why is that old clunker still in space and it's armed to the teeth and has advanced weapons on it? I can't see the Romulans ever doing something like that.
Yeah, well, they had there's actually an episode of Deep Space Nine where they did that with an Excelsior class ship. That's the one with the coup. I think it's actually called Paradise Lost or something like that, isn't it? The one where they have the coup. We lost the feed for a second. I think we're back. They had the coup on Earth, and the admiral, he had a ship intercept the Defiant, and it was an Excelsior class vessel, which on the surface of it, you're like, why are they sending up like 100-year-old vessel against the Defiant? And as soon as they start fighting it, they realize it's been totally upgraded and can totally take on the Defiant. So there's a precedence for that, just for people that will nitpick and say, well, that's dumb, because I know there's already people that are kind of like, why do they have that old bird of prey in there? Now, I've mentioned to you, again, talking about Star Trek Online. In Star Trek Online, if you choose the Romulan faction to play as, first of all, you're not Romulan Empire, you're Romulan Republic. So you mentioned that idea of other factions. Well, they have that in the game. And you start out with a bird of prey. That's the ship you start out with. That's the baseline ship you start out with. So So I think that there might be some homage to that, or some cross-pollination going on, where maybe the writers of Star Trek Picard are getting some at least some inspiration from Star Trek Online.
Right.
It seems to me that's a callback to it, and anybody who's played the game will see that. So I don't know if that's deliberate, if that's what they're going for. But then the other thing is, like you were saying, I've mentioned this, I just think that it makes sense that the Romulans, now having had to leave their empire, they would just take any ship they could get. So any Romulan design you have ever seen or haven't seen or whatever, they're all over the place because they literally had to take every single ship they had,
Right.
So anything that was in mothball was made space worthy again, and they took it,
Right.
So that would make complete perfect sense to me. I do like that design a lot. I've always liked the Romulan bird of prey. I remember as a kid wondering why they went with the Klingon design, which I didn't dislike the Klingon design, but as a kid, I didn't know that the model was destroyed and they had to go with those the Klingon ships, So because I liked it, I liked that design. In fact, I had one of those model kits that had the classic Enterprise, the classic Klingon D7, and the Romulan bird of prey on a little tripod. I had one of those model kits, and I loved the Romulan bird of prey. I used to take it off fly it around all the time, because I just thought it was a cool design. So I'm happy to see it back. I'll be interested to see if we see the TNG design back at all, though, because that has become kind of a classic design in and of itself. This is the Neutral Zone was the first episode where we saw it, and I haven't seen anything to indicate that we will see that we will see the TNG era Romulan ship. So we'll see if they decide to do that or not.
Yeah. Well, curious. We'll see. We will see. Like I said, that's my what I would like to see. I said what that is. I know that's not happening. And then as far as what it's going to be, I'm okay to wait for the show. I mean, I have my speculation, but again, my speculation's obviously wrong. So.
Well, it's still fun to speculate, even when we are wrong.
Big shock, my speculation's wrong. So.
It's still fun. Yeah. I still enjoy it. It's still good stuff. Yeah. And also, just to reiterate with the Neutral Zone, anybody wondering about a connection between the Romulans and the Borg, that's how it started. There was always a connection between the Romulans and the Borg. So for fans that want to complain about that, well, you're wrong.
Yeah, there you go. And this is another one of those episodes, if you want to watch, obviously you can watch it on Netflix, you can watch it on CBS All Access. There's lots of different places you can watch Star Trek The Next Generation. Obviously one of the greatest Star Trek shows ever produced. And this is going to be a very important episode leading up to Picard. It's definitely worth revisiting. Even if it's full of that tired old Southern Western stereotype that people keep dragging up. I don't know. I was trying to go for something there. I think it felt kind of flat. Being from the South, I wouldn't know anything about that. Is that good? Are we good here? Or?
I think so.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and let's wrap up this episode. So I want to thank you for hopefully watching or listening to this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. Again, I've been one of your hosts. My name is Dave Beatty. You can learn more about me, see some of my art, and all these various gestating projects that I swear I'm working on. I got sick. I'm tired. But they are being worked on, and they will be rolling out soon. But you can learn all about them over at my website. That's davebeatty.com. That's www.davebeaty.com. I want to thank my co-host, Eric Alexander, for bringing his obviously awesome and great perspective here to the show, as well as obviously correcting some of my Trek misremembers and helping to keep the show on course with his Trek knowledge, proving that I am not the Trekkie that some people seem to think I am.
Hey, we all have the different aspects that we focus on. You know me, I'm a big lore guy. I did want to, we got a late chat here. Mind Hunger. You said, one of my favorite episodes. Said the scene is up there with Klingon warbirds armed and ready. So I believe he was talking about Balance of Terror, but I'm not sure. But obviously, we enjoyed both episodes. And yes, Klingon warbirds armed and ready. That is a great line. So I am Eric Alexander, and I was your co-host today. You can find me on Twitter. I'm most active on Twitter. And you can see my name right there, BassGod14, BassGod14. I am streaming to you from my Twitter account as well as from my YouTube account, which is also BassGod14. And this was our first time that we did Twitch. So we're on Twitch under BassGod14 as well. And we are also on Facebook under the Retro Retrospective show that Dave does. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, whatever you enjoy, we're there.
And just so everyone who may be watching or listening knows, we do go live, unless otherwise specified, every Wednesday at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock our time, which is Arizona time, which I think is Mountain time, which I could be wrong about, but...
No, Mountain Standard Time.
Well, there you go. Mountain Standard Time. See, there's Eric keeping me on track once again, even though I was about to go for a lame joke. Well, lame jokes are what I do best. Every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Again, like Eric said, you can find us on Twitter. You can find us now on Twitch, obviously the Facebook page, and on YouTube. So again, I want to thank everyone for watching or listening to the show. Please join us next Wednesday as we continue to lead up to the debut of Picard on CBS All Access as we watch Eric slowly take the plunge into paying for yet another streaming service amidst the ongoing battles of the never-ending, it seems like, streaming wars. So I want to thank you for obviously watching this episode. Please come back, join us next Wednesday. And I wish I had a fun tagline to say until next time. See us then.